The morning started like any other shift. The road twisted through pine woods, still damp from the night rain. My partner, Mike, sat beside me, half asleep, cradling his coffee while the police radio murmured routine noise. I remember thinking it would be another quiet day, tickets, a few calls, paperwork. Nothing more. Then something small appeared ahead on the dirt road. I slowed down. At first, I thought it was a stray cat, but as we got closer, I realized it was a lynx cub. Its fur was patchy, damp, and its eyes looked too big for its face. The little thing didn't run. Instead, it stood right in the middle of the road, staring straight at the car like it wanted us to stop. Mike frowned. "Don't stop, Dan. It'll move." But it didn't. It took a few steps toward us, mewing, barely a sound, more like a plea. I parked the cruiser, and Mike sighed like he already regretted being my partner. "Come on, man. It's a wild animal. It'll bite. Or worse, the mother's nearby." Still, I opened the door. Something about those eyes hit me harder than I expected. The cub looked scared, but not of us. It looked desperate. When I stepped closer, it backed away a few steps, then turned and looked over its shoulder. It gave a short cry, then another, and started walking toward the tree line. I stopped. Mike grumbled behind me, but I could feel it. The cub was trying to lead us somewhere. "You seeing this?" I asked. "Yeah. I see you about to make my day a nightmare," he muttered, but followed me out anyway. We left the cruiser parked on the side of the dirt road. The cub trotted ahead, stopping every few yards to check if we were following. The forest closed around us quickly, quiet, heavy air, wet soil, the faint smell of pine, and something else underneath it. Something metallic. The cub stopped by a fallen log, whining. I stepped around it and froze. There she was, a full-grown lynx, caught in a steel trap. Her paw was twisted grotesquely in the metal jaws, blood matted in her fur. She lifted her head weakly, her breathing rough, eyes wide with pain and fear. The cub pressed itself against her side and let out a low cry. "Jesus," Mike whispered. "Who the hell sets traps here?" I crouched beside the animal. The metal was rusted but strong, one of those heavy, illegal traps people use for wolves. It wasn't just carelessness, it was deliberate. The lynx tried to pull away but didn't even have the strength to hiss. I felt a cold rush of anger wash over me. "We need to call wildlife control," I said, "and get a vet. She's still alive." Mike took a cautious step back. "Dan, we should wait for backup. You touch that thing, you'll lose a hand. She's not going to make it if we wait." I grabbed the handle of the trap and tried to pry it open. It barely moved. The cub hissed softly, pacing around me, but didn't attack. After a few minutes of struggle, I managed to release the spring just enough to ease the pressure. The lynx jerked free, collapsing onto the dirt, breathing fast but steady. I wrapped my jacket around her leg to slow the bleeding. Then I noticed the ground. 2 more traps half buried under leaves. A dead fox lay a few feet away. Someone had laid an entire line of these things, neatly spaced, hidden along the forest edge. Not an amateur. Mike saw it too. "This is bad. Real bad." I scanned the area, fresh tire marks, boot prints, and a pile of cigarette butts crushed into the mud. The brand was the same as the ones sold at the bar back in town. The realization hit me hard. Whoever did this wasn't hunting by accident. This was organized. And close. I grabbed my radio. "Dispatch, this is Unit 12. We've got an injured lynx, multiple illegal traps on Route 47. I need wildlife control and a vet now." As I spoke, I felt something tug on my pants. The cub had its tiny claws hooked into my uniform, staring up at me with those wide, pleading eyes. For a moment, the forest went completely silent. Just me, the cub, and the faint sound of its mother breathing behind me. I knew this wasn't going to be another quiet day. The wildlife officers arrived within the hour. Their truck carried medical kits, cages, and a quiet efficiency that told me they had seen this before. Dr. Sarah Collins, the field vet, stepped out first, a woman in her mid-30s, sharp eyes, calm hands. She didn't waste a second. "Keep everyone back," she said, kneeling beside the injured lynx. She injected a sedative, checked the wound, and signaled her team to prepare a stretcher. The cub paced in circles, hissing softly but staying close to its mother. Mike stayed behind me, arms crossed. "Hope you know what you're doing, Dan. This is turning into paperwork hell." "Yeah," I muttered, "but at least she'll live." Sarah wrapped the lynx's leg carefully, her voice even as she gave short instructions to her assistants. They lifted the animal, set it gently into the transport crate, and covered it with a blanket. The cub refused to be left behind until Sarah coaxed it into a smaller carrier, promising she would keep them together at the center. When they drove off, the silence felt heavier. I looked around the clearing again. The traps glinted under the filtered light, cold, efficient, evil in their simplicity. We started documenting everything. Mike took photos while I marked GPS coordinates, bagged the traps for evidence, and tagged the animal remains we found nearby. 3 snares, 1 dead fox, 1 shredded rabbit, and 2 blood trails leading deeper into the woods. Halfway through, we heard another car engine on the gravel road. It was Sergeant Harris, gray hair, round belly, and that tired look of someone who didn't like surprises. He climbed out, scanned the scene, and let out a sigh. "You really stirred something up here, Reed." "Sir, these traps are illegal. Someone's been running them for a while." He rubbed his forehead. "I get it. But we don't need headlines about animal cruelty in a hunting town. People get nervous when the word ban comes up. Hunters think we're coming for their rights. This isn't about hunting. This is cruelty." Harris looked at me for a moment. "And I'm telling you to tread lightly. Log it, send it to wildlife control, and let them handle it." I nodded, but inside I was burning. He was already turning away when something caught my eye. A faint red mark on a nearby tree, a line of spray paint shaped like a small cross. I'd seen that marking before. Tom Miller, a respected farmer and one of the best-known hunters in town, used the same red paint to mark his property boundaries. I took a closer look. The traps themselves were made with thick, industrial-grade wire, not something you picked up at a hardware store. I remembered helping Miller fix a section of his fence last fall. He'd had the exact same type of wire in his barn. When I turned back, Harris was already walking to his truck. "Paperwork, Reed. Don't turn this into something bigger than it needs to be." Mike packed up the camera. "He's right, man. You go poking at the wrong people, you'll end up alone in this." "Maybe. But if someone's doing this for profit, it won't stop until we make noise." That night, after the reports were filed, I couldn't shake the image of the lynx's eyes, the quiet pain, the trust that shouldn't have been there. I drove out to the rehabilitation center on the edge of town. The place was small but clean, a mix of kennels, medical rooms, and outdoor pens surrounded by pine trees. Inside, Sarah was finishing her notes under dim fluorescent lights. She looked up and smiled faintly. "You came. Had to know if she made it." She led me to the recovery area. The lynx lay sedated, her leg wrapped in thick bandages, breathing slow but steady. Machines beeped softly nearby. In the next enclosure, the cub sat curled in a corner, eyes fixed on its mother through the glass. When it noticed me, it stood up and pressed its nose against the pane. Sarah lowered her voice. "She'll make it if there's no infection." But it was close. Whoever did this knew what they were doing. Those traps are placed like a grid. Not random. I nodded. They weren't just after one animal. She handed me a tablet showing the x-rays. Metal fragments glowed white in the image. "See that? Old scars. She's been caught before. That leg's a mess inside. She's been surviving pain for months." I stared at the screen, anger rising again. It wasn't just cruelty, it was routine. Sarah sighed. "I'll send you the full report. Maybe it helps your case." My phone buzzed as I left the building. A text from Mike. "Found something in the archives. Old case, same type of traps. Guess who filed it? Tom Miller." Then another line. "Don't go picking fights you can't win, Dan. This town protects its own." The night was quiet except for the hum of crickets. I stood there for a long time, watching the faint light through the rehab center window, where the cub still pressed against the glass. For the first time that day, I realized this was bigger than a single rescue, and much harder to walk away from. The morning after, the sky was washed pale by fog when I pulled up to Tom Miller's property. His house sat on the edge of a wide field, flanked by barns and sheds, the kind of place that smelled of hay and diesel. It was supposed to be a routine check: licenses, weapon storage, hunting permits. At least that's what I told myself when I knocked on his door. Tom came out wiping his hands on a rag, wearing that calm, friendly smile he was known for. "Officer Reed, haven't seen you in a while. Everything all right?" "Just a standard inspection, Tom. Part of the seasonal review." He nodded, gesturing for me to follow him toward the barn. Inside, hunting trophies covered the walls. Antlers, bear hides, framed photos of Tom with other hunters, smiling over kills that once filled local papers. The smell of oil and metal filled the air. Always keep everything by the book, he said, opening a gun cabinet. Rifles lined up in perfect order, tags attached, clean permits pinned on the inside of the door. Everything legal, everything polished. But then my eyes caught a pile of traps stacked against the wall, half covered by a tarp. They were the same design as the ones from the forest, thick wire, spring jaws, painted black for camouflage. Those still in use? I asked. He chuckled. Those old things. Haven't touched them in years. Back when beaver pelts were worth something. I crouched closer. One of them had a faint red mark on the hinge, the same kind of spray paint from the trees in the clearing. Tom noticed my gaze, but didn't flinch. You know how it is, Dan. Out here, the forest doesn't manage itself. The predators breed fast. They take fawns, livestock, sometimes even pets. Somebody's got to keep balance. By setting steel traps? By surviving, he said simply. You city boys don't get it. This town lives on hunting. Without it, half these folks wouldn't have heat in winter or meat on the table. You start waving your badge around about cruelty, and you'll make enemies quick. His tone was calm, almost fatherly, but underneath it was a warning. I nodded, took a few photos quietly with my phone, and thanked him for his time. When I got back in the cruiser, my hands were shaking. Back at the station, Sergeant Harris was waiting near my desk. You want to see Miller? Routine inspection, I said. Cut the crap, Reed. I got a call from him. He said you were sniffing around his property like you had a warrant. I swallowed hard. I followed procedure. Harris leaned in close. Tom's a pillar of this town. He donates to the fire department, sponsors the school team, pays half the damn park maintenance out of his pocket. You make him look bad, and this department will wear it. I tried to hold his gaze, but something inside me cracked. The image of the lynx bleeding into the dirt wouldn't leave. With all due respect, sir, a good reputation doesn't excuse a crime. He exhaled slowly. You better be damn sure before you accuse a man like that. When he left, Mike rolled his chair closer. You're poking a hornet's nest, Dan. Everyone in this town hunts. You go after Miller, you go after them. Maybe it's time someone did. Later that day, I drove back to the rehab center. The cub was livelier now, batting at the edge of its enclosure, mewing softly. Sarah met me at the doorway, holding a clipboard. The mother's fighting infection, she said quietly. We're doing all we can, but if she doesn't improve, we might have to make a hard call. Space here is tight. If she's declared unfit for release, the state might order euthanasia. The words hit like a punch. And the cub? It'd go to a sanctuary, or maybe a zoo, but it'll never see the wild again. I looked at the little lynx pressing its paw against the glass. There has to be another way. She sighed. You want another way, Dan? Find who's putting out those traps. That night, I wrote my report. Every detail, every photograph, every mark on the trees. I added Miller's name as a potential suspect. When I handed it to Harris the next morning, he stared at the folder for a long time. You sure about this? He asked. Yeah, I am. He shook his head. You just put your career on the line for a cat. No, I said quietly. For what's right. By evening, Mike called me to the evidence room. He'd managed to pull footage from a highway camera not far from the forest road. On the grainy video, a pickup truck appeared, headlights cutting through the dark. The timestamp matched the night before we found the lynx. I leaned closer. The frame froze, the license plate was blurred, but the outline of the truck was unmistakable. It was Tom Miller's. Mike let out a low whistle. Guess there's no going back now, huh? I stared at the frozen image, my pulse steady. For the first time, I felt it too, the point of no return. The town wasn't big, but word traveled faster than any report. By the next morning, everyone seemed to know that Officer Reed had filed charges against Tom Miller. At the diner, people stopped talking when I walked in. Outside the station, two hunters leaned against their trucks, muttering loud enough for me to hear. That cop went after the wrong man. Inside, Sergeant Harris looked exhausted. The district attorney's office called. They're opening an investigation. Congratulations, Reed. You just made the evening news. About time someone did, I said, though my stomach churned. I hadn't wanted headlines, just justice. The DA's investigator arrived by noon, a sharp woman named Karen Boyd. She wore a plain coat and an expression that didn't change much. We'll handle this carefully, she said. Your evidence looks solid. Photos, camera footage, connection to the traps. But people like Miller have roots. Be ready for noise. Noise? I asked. Public pressure, politics, people picking sides. Welcome to small-town justice. By that evening, the local radio was already framing it as a betrayal, a decorated officer turning against a respected community member. My phone buzzed nonstop with messages. Some anonymous, some from people I'd known for years, all saying the same thing. Drop it. I shut it off and drove to the rehabilitation center. It was the only place left that made sense anymore. Sarah was there, standing by the enclosures. The lynx mother lay curled up, breathing shallowly, her legs still bound. The cub perked up when it saw me, pressed its tiny nose to the mesh, then pawed at my glove when I reached closer. For a moment, it just stayed there, eyes half closed, calm. Sarah smiled faintly. He knows your voice. Whenever you're near, he quiets down. Guess we're both in the same boat, I said. Neither of us wanted any of this. She sighed. The mother's infection hasn't improved. But if she pulls through, we can apply to release them both into a managed area in the national forest. I've been talking with Fish and Wildlife. They'd help install GPS collars. It could be a good story for once. A good story, I repeated. This town could use one. A few days later, the community meeting filled the old school gym. Folding chairs, bad coffee, restless faces. The mayor gave a speech about balance between nature and tradition, which sounded more like an apology than leadership. When I was called to speak, half the room stared coldly. I didn't come here to fight hunters, I said. I came here because an animal was left to die in a trap. That's not hunting, that's cruelty. And if we don't stand for something better, we'll lose more than just animals. From the back row, Miller sat with his arms crossed, silent, jaw tight. I could feel his eyes on me the whole time. When the meeting broke, some shook my hand quietly, but most avoided me. One man spat on the ground as I passed. The divide was clear. The next morning, I met with Boyd again at the courthouse. We've offered Miller a plea, she said. He admits to illegal trapping, pays restitution, loses his hunting license, and does educational outreach. No jail time, no felony record. And if he refuses? Then it goes to trial. But this way, we get accountability, and maybe a message that things can change. I nodded. He'll take it. He's too proud to fight a losing battle. But deep down, I wasn't so sure. Pride could be more dangerous than any weapon. That evening, I stopped by the rehab center again. Sarah's expression told me everything before she spoke. Her fever spiked. We're running fluids, but it doesn't look good. If it doesn't stabilize overnight, we may have to consider humane options. I walked past her, down the narrow hallway to the recovery room. The mother lynx lay motionless except for a slow rise and fall of her chest. The cub stirred when it heard my boots, pressed its paw through the wire again. I sat on the floor beside the cage, too tired to think, too angry to sleep. Hang in there, I whispered. Both of you. The cub blinked, then gently rested its paw on my hand. Outside, the night hummed with crickets and faraway thunder, but inside, everything was still. I stayed there until the lights dimmed, waiting for a sign the fight wasn't over yet. By dawn, my back ached from the concrete floor and my eyes burned, but I hadn't moved far from the cage. The rehab center smelled like disinfectant and damp straw. Somewhere down the hall, a dog barked twice in its sleep and went quiet again. Sarah came in with a mug of coffee and dark circles under her eyes. She checked the charts, then the lynx's bandaged leg, then the monitors. For a long moment, she said nothing. Well, I asked. She finally exhaled. Her fever broke an hour ago. It's not a miracle, but it's enough. We keep going. The knot in my chest loosened. The cub, as if understanding her tone, let out a soft sound and pressed closer to the mesh. I reached in with my gloved hand, and it bumped its nose into my fingers before curling back up. So you're saying she has a chance, I said. A small one, Sarah answered. But it's real. If the infection stays down, we move from survival to rehab. And then, maybe, release. The word hung there like a distant promise. Over the next days, the town kept buzzing. Some people crossed the street when they saw me. Others left notes on my windshield, some encouraging, some not fit to repeat. At the station, conversations stopped when I walked into the break room. Mike still had my back, but even he kept his voice low. One afternoon, Harris called me into his office. Karen Boyd sat there already, a file open on her lap. Miller took the deal, she said without preamble. He signed this morning. Harris rubbed his temples. He admitted to setting the traps. Says he only meant to control predators. Claims he never wanted to leave anything suffering. But he did, I said. Boyd nodded. He did. And he's facing consequences. His traps are confiscated. His hunting license is gone for good. He's paying fines that will fund wildlife rehab for years. And he's agreed to speak publicly about it. Publicly, I repeated. Town hall next week, she said. People need to hear it from him, not just from you. The night of the meeting, the gym was full again. Same metal chairs, same restless energy. This time, though, I sat in the back. The mayor spoke first, talking about responsibility, law, and learning from mistakes. It sounded rehearsed. Then Tom Miller walked to the microphone. He looked older than the last time I saw him, shoulders heavier, eyes duller. He cleared his throat and gripped the stand so tightly his knuckles went white. Most of you know me, he began. You hunted with me, bought meat from me, trusted me. I always said I did what I had to do to protect this town from predators. He paused, searching the crowd. But I went too far. Those traps, I told myself they were just tools. I didn't think about what it meant to leave something alive and bleeding until someone else found it. Officer Reed did. And that lynx did. A murmur ran through the room. I'm not asking for a free pass, he continued. I'm taking the punishment I agreed to. No more hunting. No more traps. I'll spend my time helping the animals I hurt. If that's what it takes to make this right, then that's what I'll do. He looked straight at me then. For a second, there was no anger in his eyes, just a tired kind of acceptance. I gave a small nod. It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Weeks slid by. The leaves in the hills turned from green to dull gold. I spent every spare hour at the rehab center, watching progress happen in slow, careful increments. The mother lynx started eating on her own, first a few bites, then more. The cub grew bolder, pouncing on toys Sarah tossed in, always circling back to his mother's side. One afternoon, Sarah met me at the gate with a different kind of smile. We got approval, she said. State signed off on a release. We picked a spot deep in the national forest, far from roads and traps. GPS collars are ready. You want to be there? I just stared at her. You're really asking me that? A week later, we loaded the crates into a wildlife truck before sunrise. A few reporters showed up, along with a handful of school kids and some local officials. The kids whispered and pointed, eyes wide. For once, the cameras weren't aimed at another accident or arrest. They were focused on a second chance. We drove high into the hills, where the road turned to rough gravel and the forest grew thick and quiet. The air smelled sharp and clean. Sarah checked the GPS collars one last time, adjusting the straps around the lynx's neck gently. She's ready, Sarah said. So's he. I stepped up to the cub's crate. He watched me with the same wide eyes I remembered from the road. Only now, there was something steadier in them. Recognition, maybe. The mayor said a few words for the cameras about respecting nature and changing old habits. I barely listened. My hands rested on the latch. Go ahead, Sarah said quietly. I opened the first crate. The mother lynx stepped out slowly, her injured legs stiff but usable. She sniffed the air, ears twitching, every muscle alert. The forest seemed to hold its breath. Then I opened the cub's crate. He leaped out, trotted to her side, and brushed against her chest with a soft sound. For a few seconds they just stood there together, taking it all in. Someone's camera clicked. A child gasped. The mother turned toward the trees. She took one cautious step, then another. The cub followed, weaving around her legs. Just before they slipped into the undergrowth, the cub stopped, turned its head, and looked back. Our eyes met. For that heartbeat, I saw the same road, the same morning, the same silent plea. A tiny animal standing in front of a patrol car, asking for help without a single word. I don't believe in signs. I never have. But something in that look hit me harder than any speech or report. It said what no one else could say out loud. That one choice not to drive past had changed everything. They vanished into the forest. The moment broke. People started talking again, packing up, heading back to their lives. Later, back on patrol, I drove the same stretch of dirt road where it all started. The trees were the same. The potholes were the same. The radio crackled with a new call, a minor domestic dispute on the far side of town. Nothing special. The kind of thing that once would have felt like background noise. Now it felt different. I pulled the cruiser onto the shoulder for a second and looked down the empty road, listening to the quiet. Here's what I know now. Every call, Every stop, every small decision can be the moment someone's hanging by a thread, whether that someone walks on 2 legs or 4. You don't always get a second chance to notice. I put the car back in gear and answered the radio. Then I drove on, paying attention in a way I never had before.